What if I told you From Software wasn't just known for their smash hits Elden Ring, Sekiro, Dark Souls, and more? And for the more knowed, cultured gamer, you're likely aware of From Software having some strong mecha roots as well, being the creator of the Armored Core series, a series that has received 6 different titles now, but the most recent being really well received. But before From Software found accidental success in the Western market, that would eventually lead to an overwhelming success and presence there, they tried to find some early Western appeal on purpose, with another title, this time with a more mech-based game, the more Western realistic-looking mechanical suits versus the prior anime-looking mecha suits, and that was Chromehounds. Chromehounds was a relatively obscure third-person mech shooter that launched back in July of 2006 on Xbox 360 only, and focused more on its online endeavors, in the form of a persistent ever-present war dubbed the Neuromis War, more so than a fully fleshed-out single-player campaign. This war would see 3 factions battle it out for supremacy, allowing players to switch factions upon conclusion of the war, each one battle by a faction attributed to their overall war score to help them win. Chromehounds was not only a pioneer, way before its time, it showcased that From Software wasn't afraid to take risks in attempting to penetrate the Western market, even if those risks, in the case of Chromehounds, didn't quite pay off. Not only were its servers brought down after only 3 to 4 years, during those 3 years, the game struggled to have a serviceable population, so despite such a cool and unique idea, a multiplayer mech simulator tactical shooter that emphasized teamwork over a giant map filled with different sectors and objectives, Chromehounds was unable to succeed in the way From Software had desired. What went wrong with Chromehounds? One of the most interesting From Software titles, and that's saying something. Well, on this episode of Death of a Game, we will investigate this and the largest contributing factors to the death of Chromehounds by utilizing a timeline of events filled with clues and bits of evidence. But most importantly, we activate our detective intuition, especially during the final deduction, where we crack the case for good, in case you miss any of the clues along the way. I'm a huge mecha and mech fan, so covering Chromehounds is going to be a delight. Pick your mech class and let's get started, detectives. The story begins in the early 2000s, back when From Software was still the veteran early developer they were, because they came from the 80s, mostly known for their first video game King's Field, an early first-person ARPG game, and then of course, highly relevant for this game, a mecha series that started it all as far back as 1997 with Armored Core. A third-person mecha game, Armored Core, was about empowering you as the main character to take on various threats that increased in difficulty as you achieved more skill, and funds that would allow you to acquire more powerful mechas. Armored Core is remembered in quite a high-profile AAA sense more recently, but the early games were anything but that, and satisfied more of a quiet niche of anime mecha enjoyers such as myself, though the majority of said audience was in the East. A problem franchises like Gundam and other mecha series have also suffered from in their inability to fully penetrate the West. From Software's first attempt at this was with another title, departing the mecha genre and Armored Core name, and instead choosing a more westernized approach in a standard mech shooter instead. The distinction being essentially no anime stuff and more grounded vehicles and weapons, like Mech Warrior or Mech Assault. This change was meant to try and appeal more to a Western audience, going first by a name that would be later abandoned, Chromehound, Age of Arms, and being showcased in an early teaser trailer as far back as the fall of 2003, being published by none other than Sega. Though Chromehounds was shown quite early on, it would actually go quiet for a number of years before being showcased at E3 in the summer of 2005, this time being just dubbed Chromehounds. Chromehounds was teased as being a mech-playable shooter with plenty of customization, which was a quite fitting early description, I might add, especially with it later on being called a mech simulator by some, potentially the first of its kind. The first major Chromehounds playtest would happen in September of 2005, later that same year. This is when we got our first real taste of what the game was supposed to be about, which was a game that promised full-on mech action online on Xbox Live only. You could team up with up to 5 other players and fight over large battlefields vying for ultimate control through a point contribution system. Customization and the ability to pilot a powerful mech were the major selling points regarding the game, especially being a From Software title. But more than just that was promised. There were talks of destructible environments, destructible mechs, sort of like Mech Warrior, and even the ability to choose between 6 different roles, of which we will cover more in detail later on. And the holy grail of the game really was the always online persistent world that allowed players to engage in an ever-present conflict that rotated factions. Think in modern times something like PlanetSide 2, or I guess even Guild Wars 2's World vs. World, well, the multiplayer matchmaking versions of that, surely, but with giant killer mechs. Right before they were set to launch, showing the seriousness of their online efforts, From Software would form a new company dubbed From Networks, a subsidiary focused on making multiplayer network games for console and for PC. While it would take a while for them to get there, eventually From Software would put out a successful Elden Ring multiplayer spin-off game and are currently working on a multiplayer Nintendo Switch game called The Dustbloods as of 2026, showcasing that they got only more serious about multiplayer as the time went on. Chromehounds would launch first in Japan before following that launch with an EU, NA, and then Australian launch in that order, culminating in July of 2006. Chromehounds really was a unique multiplayer title like no other. Not only was it a large-scale tactical team-based third-person mech shooter, whoa that's a mouthful, it was offering a unique online experience that nobody else at the time, especially in the world of mech games, was offering. Chromehounds had very large maps, but not in the traditional sense. A couple of maps are combined to form zones or regions, to which are then spread out over a large landmass, divided by sectors laid out across a grid. So if you wanted to communicate, you needed to find out what letter or number grid you were located in to relay your position properly so you could control the grids and win the match. But you couldn't just communicate regularly. Chromehounds was full of interesting tricks, such as within its 6 different roles, one of them was a commander role that actually granted the team the ability to communicate over voice, utilizing the relay system on their mech. The other roles consisted of things like soldier, sniper, defender, scout, and even the heavy gunner, which honestly, besides the soldier and scout, pretty underutilized roles within the mech universe. The best part is these weren't even full classes. They were more like archetypes that mechs could fit into. For example, a soldier typically would use a bipedal leg combination with the medium cockpit, making them very flexible as frontline specialists. Finally, the most extreme example besides commanders was like the heavy gunner, which moved like a caterpillar on the battlefield, but had the firepower of like a hornet. These roles provided different benefits and strengths that must be used tactically as a team to succeed on the battlefield. The critical reception for Chromehounds, however, was heavily mixed at 71 out of 100 from 60 different critics. Sure, there were some good reviews from the likes of GameSpot even, rating it a 79 out of 100, saying that this unique mech combat sim looks great in action, but gets most of its mileage out of its persistent online campaign, which can be very fun for dedicated players. IGN would rate it a full letter grade lower, at 69 out of 100, where they thought the game, despite the bells and whistles, just amounted to a point-and-shoot experience. Which is a bit strange when, of course, that's what the game's about, but I guess the point just being they were expecting more than just that. But Chromehounds had its immense strengths, ones that were teased early on in the handlings of the game, such as the garage system allowing you to fully customize your mech, such as putting it on a mobile track, giving it 2 legs, or even 4, and customizing how large the chassis was, and even where you wanted the cockpit to be located at. There were millions of possibilities, like me saying cockpit for some reason, with no exaggeration, which was a good and bad thing. Making the game less approachable to non-hardcores, for sure, but also giving you a totally unique way to play the game. And the critical reception regarding the game's combat system is a mixed bag. Much of the criticism there seems to be from strange expectations of something a bit not like a mech shooter, and perhaps more mecha and otherworldly-like, and others not being able to enjoy the team focus of the game and the less like MVP player-type stuff. But positives aside, and battling the other negatives, Chromehounds did have some serious flaws to it, such as the fact that although the game had a campaign, it was just essentially a collection of tutorial missions that amounted in a prologue mission to teach you how to play the game, and kind of give you the setting of what the online game was about, which was cool, maybe as like an addition to the campaign, but the reason this was significant was like if you look at all famous or popular mech or mecha shooters, they have a campaign. Chromehounds had chosen to devote more time to their online features, which were impressive on paper, but could barely translate that to interest, then enjoyment, and of course, sales. And, well, sales and the public reception around Chromehounds wasn't doing so hot. Not only was the game reportedly quite low in population, according to a former developer at launch, the people playing and possibly enjoying the game were encountering game freezes and performance issues, even on the Xbox 360, which I say even because of how optimized games typically have to be on a console. But then I realized I forgot to tell you guys, maybe, that Chromehounds was an Xbox 360 exclusive. Yep, you heard that right. It didn't and wasn't planning on launching on PC or PlayStation. The reason this was so problematic in my opinion was because it gave the game an even more niche audience than before, a problem the game was already suffering from due to its style of game, and how much investment it took to customize your mech. Something the Armored Core series didn't really suffer from, by the way. But according to producer Justin Lambros, from a technological perspective, there was a new Xbox platform. I can't remember what it was, but I remember having to work very closely with Xbox to get it to work. So perhaps it was due to them having access to a particular tech or something, or a prior relationship. Regardless, all eggs were placed in the very successful Xbox 360 platform basket, even as mecha shooters still retain a strong presence on PC in modern times, and Sega, their publisher, had a prior relationship with Sony, working as a major third-party publisher and developer for them on the PS3. From Software would address the connection, freezing, and performance issues with a major update released September 7th, 2006. This was 2 months after launch, which made, these 2 months a hellish time, and likely contributed to the heavy player hemorrhaging. Although it might shock some watching this video, and even those who were playing the game at the time, but according to Justin, and no, not me, the producer who worked on Chromehounds, the game had a very small population, and it was a wonder they kept it running for 3 years, especially given the game was Japanese in origin, a market who cuts their multiplayer titles loose as soon as they slow down. This shutdown was announced August 17th, 2009, set for early the following year. Chromehounds would have just a few more months to be enjoyed as a game, but considering the game had little to no single-player campaign and the access to the 6v6 CPU mode was only playable online, meant that this shutdown would be truly devastating for the dedicated, but small Chromehounds audience. The servers would officially shut down January 6th, 2010, less than 4 years after the servers went live. The company who helped launch Chromehounds, the mech simulator alongside From Software, From Networks, would also seemingly disappear. Chromehounds would then disappear for nearly a decade before another game would rise from the ashes, taking heavy inspiration from the game and launching on Kickstarter, MAV, or M.8.V, short for Modular Assault Vehicle. MAV was a real project that had testing phases players could be involved with, and was built using the Unity engine. The actual gameplay for the game was quite decent, but either the return on the investment wasn't worth it, or something more serious happened, because MAV would sadly disappear and become a mere ghost of a project online. Years would pass, and not only would Chromehounds and mechs from Software become background noise, but 10 years would pass and they wouldn't put out another mecha game from their iconic Armored Core series even. And to be honest, it's understandable. They had hit big with the Dark Souls series in the West, kind of on accident, selling over 40 million copies, but that would prove to be just the very beginning, as they would strike true multiple times again, with Sekiro and Elden Ring coming out after combining to sell a whopping 40 million copies again. From Software had moved on from Sega, following their fading in the industry as a publisher and company overall, and was now more buddied up with Sony and Bandai Namco, dominant players in the space, creating a new popular genre in the process that found mass appeal. The tables had turned from how things looked post-Chromehounds shutdown, and From Software was on top. And they would keep rising up the top, finally in the favor of a mecha shooter when they would unveil a new title in the hit series Armored Core titled Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon, a game that would launch on all possible platforms and find itself taken extremely well critically, possibly the best for a mecha shooter ever, and host a very successful 4.5 out of 5, very positive score from nearly 40,000 players on Steam. Reportedly, it would sell over 3 million copies too, which was super impressive for a mecha shooter, and honestly hasn't ever really been done before besides maybe the Titanfall series if you want to count that. Armored Core 6 was super impressive. For the first time, it featured a true AAA quality campaign, and honestly has very little multiplayer focus at all, which is the complete opposite of Chromehounds, so maybe that was them kind of taking notes a bit. But just when the timeline seemed to come to an end, and the fate of Chromehounds seemed to be all but destined for the shelf indefinitely, the community would strike July 2025, when they would make the announcement that through emulation, Chromehounds would be returning, including online. You can visit their Discord for more information, which I will link in the description, but you can just see that on screen, from the footage, that this was working. And there's already new footage of Chromehounds available as of just months ago. Shout out to the community support for Chromehounds making it possible to preserve the game, a game that effectively had a persistent world, shooter or not. The community is undefeated when it comes to preservation, especially with persistent games and persistent online worlds and virtual worlds. And preservation only happens in games that have some level of quality in them, like Chromehounds clearly did. It's also great to see that MechWarrior still manages to have an online presence with the co-op enabled MechWarrior 5 and Clans, and the PvP focused MechWarrior Online, which is almost 20 years old at this point. Sure, these games aren't moving as many units as mecha games these days, but they still have smaller but highly dedicated audiences, showing that mech and mecha shooters are still popular amongst nerds. But the timeline has come to an end, detectives, and we've gathered more than enough clues to crack this case. So, if you missed any of the clues along the way, why did Chromehounds find itself on the Death of the Game series? It had a small population and poor sales. Sega was just fading. It lacked the complete package. It had a very niche game design. It was an Xbox exclusive. While this case has largely ended on a positive note, it's not a totally positive one in the sense of the forward future for Chromehounds, as it's still reportedly owned by Sega, but perhaps being satisfied with the recent community online efforts is just fine anyway, especially with plenty of other mecha and mech shooters out there to play. But the multiplayer presence that was always expected for them, on the other hand, has been a quite tepid one, with me even covering another failure from Gundam that was also featured on the Death of a Game series. So perhaps these games are better suited for their single-player power fantasy roots. I mean, at the moment there's like a few dozen to choose from there that aren't Gundam, Armored Core, or Mech Warrior. Well, at least until someone gets brave again enough to try online, seriously, specifically PvP. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what you thought of Chromehounds, if you got the chance to play it, and any reasons that you think I missed for why the game ultimately died. On to the next case, detectives. We're covering a virtual world and MMORPG creator who helped shape the entire industry, so stay tuned.
So you want to join the Hopeport Town Guard? Then here's what you need to know. We're not just about fighting fire toads. We also investigate potential threats.